Hi everyone, Digibro here. We're going to slow things down a little today. Instead of giving you a scripted, high-intensity, verbose analysis, I'm going to tell you a little story. And it's a story that I've gotten asked about a lot of times. A lot of people have come to me with the question of how did I get into anime and what is sort of my history with the subject. Because I've been into anime for a very long time, and I've told this story a lot of times in different places, but I figured, let's just make a fucking video for it, and then nobody will ask me about it anymore. In the 90s, I was really into a lot of stuff that came from Japan. I didn't necessarily know that all of it was from Japan, but I was big into Power Rangers when that was a thing. And then I eventually got really into Pokemon. I was into Godzilla as well. I couldn't really differentiate between the Japanese side of Godzilla and the American side. When the American Godzilla movie came out, I fucking adored it. Because, as far as I was concerned, it was Godzilla. He's the same big-ass lizard. I was like fucking 6. So whatever, it was cool. But then Pokemon came out. And I didn't know Pokemon was anime. I knew it was Japanese, but I did not know the term anime yet. So I knew it was Japanese though, and I got really into Nintendo through Pokemon. I got really into video games and everything through Pokemon. But I was obsessed with Pokemon for like 4 years. So I was already kind of predisposed to the idea of being into anime. Those sort of sensibilities were already with me, even though like Power Rangers was remade for the US audiences and stuff. You know, that general style was already something I appreciated. So then the first time I ever saw something that I knew was anime, even though I didn't really know what anime was Ninja Scroll in 2000. And the way that this happened was that I have 2 older cousins. One of them, well, I have a bunch of older cousins, but 2 of them who I've spent a considerable amount of time with. One who's much older than me, I think 8 years older, his name is Jared, and then one who's 4 years older than me named Boyd. Now, I looked up to Boyd like a big brother, and Boyd looked up to Jared because he was the eldest cousin. So when both of them were at our house, then, you know, like all of us were looking up to each other kind of thing. It was an exciting sort of dynamic between the 3 of us. So Jared was big into anime, but mostly he knew the big ones. He knew Ninja Scroll, Ghost in the Shell, stuff like that. These big, violent, famous 90s movies that had really brought anime to America in the first place. And I remember he watched Ghost in the Shell at our house, but he told me not to watch it because it was like too dark. But I remember like sneaking peeks of it while he was watching it and being like, whoa, this is super violent and there's nudity. What the fuck? This is crazy. But he showed us Ninja Scroll. Like, me and my brothers, or I think maybe Victor was there, but it was mostly me and Boyd and Jared at like 2 in the afternoon watching Ninja Scroll on the big screen TV in the main room of our house. And I had never, ever seen anything violent like that before. Like, I loved action, you know, I loved Power Rangers, I loved Godzilla, these are action-centric things, but I had not really seen anything violent. Growing up, I didn't watch, like, any live-action movies at all, especially if they were violent. My parents called them kill movies, and we just avoided them. It wasn't so much that my parents told us, like, you're not allowed to watch this, we didn't want to. Our parents made them sound scary, so we were like, fuck that. So as a kid, I just didn't watch anything that was violent at all. So Ninja Scroll comes along, and it's odd, because even after watching this movie, I had a problem with, like, dark and violent things. Like, for a long time, when me and my cousin got into anime, as I'll talk about a little bit later, he always wanted to watch dark, violent stuff, and I was always like, no, fuck that, I just want to watch the fun stuff, you know? But somehow, when we watched Ninja Scroll, and this is 2000 or so I'm like 9, it starts off insanely violent. It starts off from like the first minute, there's this giant kunai knife cutting through like all these fucking dudes in this forest, like cutting down all these trees, spinning around, cutting all these ninjas in half. Blood explodes, rains down on the grass. There's like shots of just blood raining down and shit. It's intense as fuck. And it didn't scare me or disturb me. Maybe because it was a cartoon and I was used to cartoons, and the idea of cartoon violence just didn't hit me the same way it would have if it was a real movie. Because I just watched it with awe. I was like, whoa, action, this is crazy, you know? And all these fights are happening, and then there's the scene early into the movie where the ninja girl is basically getting raped. He doesn't penetrate her, but he's like licking her all over and shit, and her boobs are out. This big like golem guy, he's like licking her all over, and my mom comes walking into the room like right when this scene is happening, and she's just like, what the fuck is this? What are you showing my children? And she doesn't trust Jared anyway, because Jared's kind of a violent maniac. So she was like, what the fuck? You're corrupting my children and all that. But she let us keep watching it. It was funny because she called up to the stairs to my dad like, there's some anime, like some cartoon with some girl getting licked all over. And my dad's like, what? I want to see. But we ended up watching all of Ninja Scroll, even though like I think the DVD fucked up halfway through, or either that or I passed out. For some reason I missed like the middle, like one of the fights in the middle, but overall I remembered it very strongly. It was like, whoa, this is like a real action thing with like lots of fucking shit happening. And then my cousin Boyd got really into it. Like after watching that movie, he was like, whoa, like world changing. That was the greatest thing I've ever seen. I don't think he had any money to go buy it for himself. He later did eventually buy it on VHS, but at the time, you know, he was just like blown away. It was like this magical thing that had happened. And so my cousin Jared, like I said, he was watching Ghost in the Shell and all that, but he wasn't around that often. That was like a rare occurrence that he was at our house. So for a while after that, I didn't see any more stuff like that. But Boyd started looking into anime. He started getting interested in like trying to figure out what is this thing, this anime, what is this anime? And around this time, like a few months later, this would either have been at the very end of 2000 or like early 2001, because it wasn't long after that when Cowboy Bebop started airing on Cartoon Network. And at first it was just airing by itself. It was not a part of a block, because Adult Swim formed around Cowboy Bebop. Like, there were already adult-centric shows that were coming on late at night on Cartoon Network, where they had, like, Toonami After Dark, which had, like, the unedited versions of Gundam Wing and Outlaw Star on it. They had Space Ghost Coast to Coast aired late at night, and that was weird and adult. And so they had a few shows like that. Then Cowboy Bebop started airing in 2001, and no one paid attention to it at first. Like, no one caught on that it was a thing. And then they introduced Adult Swim. And I want to say Cowboy Bebop had like 13... It was on for like 13 weeks before they did Adult Swim, which I hadn't even realized at the time. But I saw a couple episodes of it on TV, and I didn't really understand them. Like, I saw like the first episode, and I was like, what was that about? Like, that was weird. That was a cartoon that was obviously like darker and more adult and more confusing, and was not something I easily understood. But then Adult Swim started, and at the same time that Adult Swim was kicking off, my cousin Boyd bought the first ever issue of Anime Invasion, which is a magazine which later came to be known as Anime Insider. Originally it was Anime Invasion because anime was invading the country, and then they said, anime has already finished the invasion, so we're changing our name to Anime Insider. Now, the thing is, at this time, I had been a big-time fan of Nintendo Power magazine for years because of Pokemon. I think what had happened was that we got Nintendo Power because my mom had bought a subscription, because getting a subscription to Nintendo Power gave you a free Pokemon trading card game for the Game Boy. It was like a game of the card game for the Game Boy. And we got it for free with the subscription or something like that. So I had been collecting Nintendo Powers, and I didn't really read them because at the time I was not a big reader, but I would like read the reviews and look through them and just like sort of enjoy them. But the point is, and I also had like a lot of Beckett Pokemon Collector magazines. I had a lot of magazines, is what I'm getting at. I liked magazines. So when he comes over with Anime Insider, or Anime Invasion rather. It was the first issue with Dragon Ball on the cover, and he was like, there's this thing, it's anime, it's like Japanese cartoons, Dragon Ball's an anime, Pokemon's an anime, there's all these other animes, and they just started a whole new block on Cartoon Network called Adult Swim that's all anime. And I was like, whoa, what is this? So he loaned me the first volume, that first issue of Anime Invasion, and I had been reading through it and stuff, and we've been watching, every Saturday we'd watch Adult Swim, and there was Cowboy Bebop and Yu Yu Hakusho were the first two shows that would come on, and those were the big two. Like, those were the ones we were really excited about, because Cowboy Bebop was this crazy action story, and even though, like, a lot of it went over my head, because it is an adult show, and I was a little kid, I was like 10, but it was so engaging because there's so much going on in Cowboy Bebop. It's just this, like, it's dark, but at the same time it's funny. There's characters like Ed who are just these wacky, fun characters. Episode 2, because episode 1 is like really dark, but episode 2 is this fun one where they're chasing a dog and they're just like flying spaceships around, and it was like, whoa, this is exciting. And then Yu Yu Hakusho is like, that was like the first Adult Swim, shonen action show, which, I mean, they'd already had stuff like Dragon Ball Z air on Cartoon Network, but Yu Yu Hakusho is the first one to be on Adult Swim, and it was hella fun. It's like got demons and shit, and it's basically, I mean, it is a kids show. That's the thing. In Japan, Yu Yu Hakusho was a shonen thing. It's made for people my age at that time when I was 10. So, as a 10-year-old, I totally dug it. I was like, whoa, this is so cool, they're awesome, they fight, and they fucking kill enemies and stuff. This is wicked. They had, then, like, after that, it would be, like, Pilot Candidate, which was total shit. And so it was, like, a game of, can I make it through Pilot Candidate and Gundam 0080 or 83. It was one of those two, and I didn't really, like, Gundam was not bad, but I didn't understand it at the time. Like, I just didn't know what the fuck was happening. So it's like, can I last through Pilot Candidate and Gundam 0083 in order to watch Outlaw Star and Tenchi Muyo? And I usually didn't. I only saw a few episodes of Outlaw Star, and I never got around to watching Tenchi. Especially because it was kind of perverted, and as a kid, I was like super averse to perverted things. So I rarely saw those shows, but, that was the original Adult Swim block, and Cowboy Bebop and Yu Yu Hakusho were the ones that, like, really mattered to me. So anyways, after some months of being into Adult Swim and having this Anime Invasion magazine, eventually, in, like, the middle of 2002, like, early mid 2002, at the start of summer, around the end of the school year, then my family packed up and moved to Florida to live with my aunt. And, like, we moved from Virginia Beach, which is where I live now, again. But we lived in Virginia Beach near my cousin, and then we moved away. We moved down to Florida, and we were moving in with, with some other cousins. And my cousin Boyd gave me the Anime Invasion magazine, and on the way from Virginia Beach to Florida, the, like, 2-day trip, I read that fucking magazine cover to cover. I read everything. I read about all of the things that they changed in the English dub of Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball, because that was the first big article. That was like their cover issue, was here's everything they changed when they brought Dragon Ball over to the US. So right off the bat, I already know about the fact that they change stuff when they bring it over, that they change things in the dub, that they were censoring shows and stuff like that, like these insider details that now everyone knows, but at the time this was like a big deal. It's like, whoa, they changed Dragon Ball when they translated? That's crazy. They had an episode guide to Robotech. Well, they actually called it Macross. It was actually Macross, the guide to every episode of Macross, and I read through all that, even though I didn't understand what I was reading. It talked about Gundam Wing. It talked about all this other shit. It talked about everything. It was just all this anime stuff. Like, basically anything that was out in the US, even obscure things I hadn't heard of, were being talked about in this magazine. So I was like, whoa, anime is fucking cool. So then down in Florida, then I was still watching the shows on Adult Swim, and they started changing them. They had Inuyasha started up in 2002, like later into the year. So Yu Yu Hakusho, Inuyasha, and Cowboy Bebop were now my big three, because Inuyasha was also like a dumb kiddie action show, you know, and I think they might have been playing some kind of anime like stuff on Toonami. I think Dragon Ball Z was probably still on the air, and then we moved back eventually. Like after we only were in Florida for like 3 or 4 months, and in that time, you know, I was really growing passionate about the idea of anime, but there's still only like 3 or 4 shows that I could watch. Then we came back at the end of 2002, and this is when Inuyasha was getting into full swing. They were like moving the time slots though. I remember they moved Adult Swim to fucking Sunday for the anime block, and it crushed my soul because I had to go to bed early on Sundays, and like Saturdays were my night. And when they changed that, oh, that was the worst thing ever. But at the same time, when we moved back from Florida, we didn't have cable for a while, so I was watching the WB channel 2, which is an off-cable channel, and that's where they were playing Yu-Gi-Oh! I'd never seen Yu-Gi-Oh! Before, and it was already like well into it, and they were in the first time that they meet Bandit Keith when he fights the zombie horde cards, and it just was on one day when I came home from school, and I was like, what is this thing? This is pretty cool. So I quickly got really into Yu-Gi-Oh! Because that's all there was to watch. There was no other anime on, you know, without cable. So I just get like really heavily into Yu-Gi-Oh! And then my cousin Boyd started hanging out again because we lived close enough to him. We were back in Virginia Beach at this time, and my cousin Boyd had been buying a few VHS. So he had gotten Ninja Scroll, the movie X. He got Blood the Last Vampire and Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust. We watched all of those, like each of those together, like at different times, and each one was like mind-blowing. Like fucking Blood the Last Vampire is just crazy violent. There's a scene where she yells to this guy to bring her sword because like she's the vampire Saya, and like the bad guys are Chiropterans. They're these evil vampire monster things, and the only way to kill them is to make them lose enough blood. And so you need a sword. So she yells at the guy, "Sword!" And he throws her the sword, and she fucking cuts his Chiropteran in half, and blood goes everywhere, and it was crazy. The movie X had this scene where a guy like implodes a guy with his mind. Like everyone had psychic powers, and he just like crumples this dude up like a paper ball and then makes him like into nothing with psychic powers. These movies were all really violent, but again, as a kid, like I didn't see them as violent in the way that like people are dying. It was violent in the way like, whoa, cool, that guy got fucking owned, you know? It was crazy shit happening. And as a kid, all I cared about was action, so that stuff was just amazing. I remember the first DVD that Boyd got, because this is when DVDs were first becoming a thing. And we had a DVD player, so Boyd gets Mobile Suit Gundam Char's Counterattack. And we watched that, and I remember liking it just because, again, it had action, even though I did not understand anything. Because Char's Counterattack is like, it's like the sequel to 3 different Gundam shows. Like, you really gotta know your Gundam to kind of understand what the fuck's happening in that movie. But it was entertaining, nonetheless. So yeah, that's when it sort of started taking off, because 2003 rolled around, and that's when Adult Swim they brought it back to Saturdays for anime. They started introducing a bunch of new shows. They brought out FLCL, Blue Gender, I want to say like Wolf's Rain would have been later. They brought out those two and something else. They started introducing new shows, and then they also added this block right before Adult Swim that was an action block. Like, it was just a bunch of action shows that had like Samurai Jack and stuff like that, but then it had a bunch of anime. They had G Gundam on, they had fucking Rurouni Kenshin started coming on, and I got big into Rurouni Kenshin, let me tell you what, because that was a sword fighting show. That was just the coolest shit ever. So G Gundam Rurouni Kenshin, it had Dot Hack Sign, which is about a video game. How cool is that? Dot Hack Sign's a terrible fucking show. I'm sorry. I know a lot of you probably like it. Go back and try to watch that shit. It is terrible. But as a kid, dude, Greatest thing ever. And don't get me wrong, Dot Hack Sign's soundtrack is still my favorite soundtrack ever, but the show's bad. So anyway, those things start coming out. And at this time, my cousin Boyd had started getting a weekly allowance of $30, which is exactly enough to buy an anime DVD. Or maybe it was 25 and like we were going between Suncoast and Best Buy every other week or something. Whatever the case was, at the time at Suncoast, which is a place that doesn't even exist anymore, they had a huge DVD selection, and like every anime that came out on DVD was at Suncoast. They always had it. So their selection was crazy, but it was $30 a pop for a DVD. And we're talking about in an age where the average 26 episode show is released on 8 discs, and the average 13 episode show is released on 4 discs. And then eventually they started phasing it towards 6 discs for a 26 episode show because it was, they were trying to be competitive. So 6 discs sort of started becoming normal around this same time. Either way, it was expensive as shit to collect a lot of anime. I certainly couldn't afford it. Boyd could kind of afford it. So we'd go out and we'd buy these shows. Or rather, he'd buy them. I'd go out with him. He'd buy like stuff like Escryed was one of the first ones we got. Saint Seiya, that was airing on Cartoon Network as Knights of the Zodiac, and then he went out and bought the DVDs as Saint Seiya. God, all kinds of shit. The Ninja Scroll TV show. He bought a lot of DVDs. Like for most of 2003 and 2004, every week we would go out and he'd get a DVD. The Samurai X DVDs, which were the Rurouni Kenshin OVAs, which are fucking awesome. Just all this shit. The Rurouni Kenshin OVAs were like, when I saw that was like life-changing. It was the best thing I'd ever seen, just for the action. Now those films, those OVAs are phenomenal. The first one at least is phenomenal. But I appreciate it for so many other reasons now, whereas as a kid, it was just the best action scenes I'd ever seen. It was just these incredibly fast, violent, intense bursts of action that I had never quite seen before. Because if you watch Rurouni Kenshin, the action's great, but it's mostly characters standing around, talking, describing their moves, and then they'll do a special attack or something. And Rurouni Kenshin was cartoony. It was... he called out the names of his attacks, and he fought with a reverse blade sword. Samurai X was just fucking violent. He'd just run up to someone and fucking shank them, and they'd be dead. And it was like, holy fuck, this is intense. This is awesome. And, so, yeah, I continued to be into action shows. They continued to bring action shows out. And I eventually started making an allowance, too. I want to say I was making $25 a month. Now, at Best Buy, anime DVDs were only $21, but they had a much smaller selection. So when I would buy DVDs, I'd usually buy them at Best Buy. I remember the first anime DVD I bought was Rurouni Kenshin Volume 7, because that was the one that had Kenshin versus Saito. I want to say it was 7. I think it was Volume 7. Kenshin versus Saito, which is my favorite fight from the show. And I got to see it uncensored, because there was, like, there's a lot of blood in the uncensored Kenshin. So that was cool, even though I never would buy a random DVD like that again, like random number in the series. I don't remember what I got. I think the next ones I got were the Samurai X DVDs and then some other shit. But I also started collecting manga, because at this same time in 2003, they started releasing the American Shonen Jump. So... Shonen Jump in Japan is this enormous fucking phone book of like 30 manga that gets released every week. It's fucking crazy. The American Shonen Jump was only once a month, and it was much smaller, but I didn't know any of that at the time. It had... the first one I got was Volume 3, so at this point it had One Piece, Naruto, Dragon Ball, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Shaman King... I want to say there was some other... Hikaru no Go might have been in there. Maybe one other. Yu Yu Hakusho. I want to say that was all of them. So a lot of the big stuff that was on TV was now in the magazine as a manga. And immediately you can see all the stuff that they changed. Like, you're reading Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's like, whoa, this stuff wasn't in the show, because the whole first arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not in the show. Um, Dragon Ball, like I never really saw it on television, like the original Dragon Ball. So that was cool to read. You know, just be reading all this stuff and it'd be totally different. Yu Yu Hakusho has like a whole arc before when the show starts, just like Yu-Gi-Oh does. So yeah, it was intense. And I can't remember if Yu Yu Hakusho was actually in Shonen Jump. I feel like it was, but yeah, I think it was. Anyway, I started collecting Shonen Jump and I learned what manga was. So now I'm all like, whoa, manga, what's this thing? This is where anime comes from? Because I learned, of course, that manga is what most anime is based on. And I was like, oh shit, there's even more to it. There's more than I thought. And so I started reading manga. The first one I ever bought was King of Bandits Jing. And King of Bandits Jing is awesome. It's just this like crazy, trippy, fucking weird shit. It starts off more normal, but as it goes, it gets like really intense and crazy. And I know that was my first one, and I loved it. And then I got like Rave Master. I got really into that. Naruto, when that started coming out, I was like super fucking into Naruto because it was about ninjas and they were fucking kick ass and there was blood everywhere. It was awesome. And everyone hates on Naruto nowadays, but when you're 12, Naruto's incredible. And then Bleach eventually started coming out. I only ever got the first 2 volumes of that though. I never had, like, I think it ran in Shonen Jump eventually, but not while I was reading it. And at this time as well, I was already into the internet around the time that Yu-Gi-Oh came out, because I got into some Yu-Gi-Oh forum in like 2002. So me and Boyd would always go on the internet to learn stuff about anime, and I joined a forum called Otaku Boards, and I was on this forum for a long time. So I would hear about anime, I'd hear about all these legendary shows like Neon Genesis Evangelion or Hellsing, which at the time was like a legendary show, and I was just like, whoa, these shows sound so cool. We saw the first two DVDs of Eva my cousin Boyd had bought, and we watched those. And then Hellsing, I had the first 2 DVDs of. Like, I had a lot of shows. A lot of them I sold eventually. Like, a lot of the early manga and anime that I got into, at the point when I no longer was into it, I sold a lot of it in bulk. And a lot of my DVDs as well I bought from Boyd, because around the time that we eventually moved away, like me and my family moved away from where he was, so I didn't see him for like 4 years between 2004 and 2008. But before we moved, he had sold me a lot of his DVDs for like $5 a pop, and then I sold a lot. So basically our collections changed significantly. And after, or rather right before that move, I got into video games. Like, I mean, I'd always been playing them, but this was like in a big way. I got really into video games. And so after this move, because I wasn't around Boyd anymore, and because I was getting so into video games, I kind of got out of anime. Like, just, I wasn't into it in the way I had been for those first 2 years of just constantly discovering stuff and being all about anime. That was all I cared about. You know, now things were changing. And I got really big into video games, studying video game history. It was partly because the new house we moved into, we got G4 Tech TV. So I'd watch shows like X-Play and all this other shit that was telling me about video games. I was learning about them. I was doing research on them. So for like a year, my biggest passion was video games in like 2005. And I did watch anime still because Adult Swim was still on. And they introduced like Trigun became one of my favorite shows. They had Full Metal Alchemist started airing. Wolf's Rain, which I never got into Wolf's Rain, but I did get into Full Metal Alchemist. Paranoia Agent, which was fucking awesome. Oh, man. All kinds of stuff started coming out, and all of it was great. Pretty much everything was great. But then we moved to another house, and at this time we had no cable and no money. So at this point, I had pretty much no means to watch new anime at all. Couldn't watch it on TV, couldn't buy it. And at this point, I got really into music. And I stayed into music for about a year and a half, and I never, like, even when we moved into a different house that had cable, and when I had money, I would spend the money on music. and I didn't really get back into anime again until the very end of 2006. And that's when I would see a lot of images. I gotten into Mega Tokyo, the webcomic, which is heavily anime and manga and visual novel influenced. And it's sort of about Japanese culture. So I start reading Mega Tokyo and getting really into it. And then I was participating in the forums. And everyone in the Mega Tokyo forums, in the anime and manga discussion section, everyone was always talking about this show called The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. Was all I saw. Everyone's avatars was from it. Everyone was talking about it. I skipped a beat because this didn't get me back into anime, but I did in 2006 watch all of Neon Genesis Evangelion. And at the time I was 15, and the show resonated with me so perfectly. It was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. No, I was 14 because I was Shinji's age, but I turned 15 like a month later. But everything about Evangelion was the greatest thing I'd ever seen in my life. It was immediately my favorite show. I got it on DVD, but it didn't get me back into anime. It just made me a big fan of Eva. It was at the end of 2006 when I watched Haruhi, and I got really into that show too. It was like my number 2 right after Eva, immediately. Because both of these shows dealt a lot with the kind of philosophical things I had been thinking about at the time. Where, because I'd gotten really philosophical and, like, introspective in that age. And, like, the idea that Haruhi was a god and, like, because of... It had to do with, like, her loneliness and everything. Basically, it related to a lot of things I was feeling at the time. And, so I got really into it. And then I start participating in the Mega Tokyo forums more. And as 2007 starts, I find out about current anime. Because I never really thought about it, you know? Shows come out in Japan. Eventually they're here in the US. You don't think about the fact that they air at a certain time every week in bulk. There's like 100 anime airing. Not 100, but there's a lot of them airing at any given time. And in early 2007, I start finding out about that because the people on Mega Tokyo would watch shows as they come out. These are people who are downloading torrents. I had never heard of a torrent. They were watching, not as many of them were watching streams because they were mostly, you know, people who knew what they were doing. And streams back then were shit. Early 2007, YouTube is barely a thing yet. And, at least not for streaming video. And most of the illegal stream sites just had shit quality. But that's what I was watching on because I didn't know any better. So I just watched stuff on streams. And now, at this time in 2007, my interests had shifted considerably. Because remember, growing up, all I cared about was action shows. Action, action, action. Every show had to have fucking action in it. The action scenes were what I remembered in all those shows. But now I'm getting introspective. Now I like stuff like Evangelion and Haruhi. Haruhi has no action. It's just a comedy show with some really interesting philosophical themes behind it. So early 2007 comes around, and now I like girls, you know? I liked cute girls and stuff, which I hadn't been into as a 12-year-old. The idea of girly stuff scared me. All I cared about was action and manly stuff. So I was afraid to admit this. I didn't want anyone to know the stuff I was watching in 2007. Because the first shows I got into were like Gakuen Utopia Manabi Straight and Hidamari Sketch. Those are the two I remember the best as like the first ones that I watched while they were airing. I didn't watch them all the way through while they were airing because I was always lazy about keeping up with shows. But I remember watching like the first few episodes as they were coming out and being like, whoa, these shows are kind of cool. And then I started going through my old DVDs. Because I had bought like the first volume of Serial Experiments Lane years prior. And I watched it back and I was like, whoa, this is cool. This is cooler than I remember because I was too young to understand it before. So I bought the rest of the DVDs and I watched that and I was like, yeah, Lane is cool. Then I bought Kino's Journey and I was like, whoa, these things are like, there's a lot of anime that are like this. A lot of these like deeper shows. I watched like the first half of Mushishi around this time. And then never finished it. So all these shows start coming out. And then 2007 spring. This is the point where where I got really big back into anime. Because Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann started airing, and Lucky Star started airing at the same time. Now, neither of these shows did I finish while they were airing. I watched about the first half of each. But they were a huge deal. Both of these shows were a big fucking deal at the time. And everyone was talking about them. And then everyone had anime blogs. Like, on Mega Tokyo forums, like, half the people there had fucking anime blogs. And so I started following their anime blogs, and I decided to make my own. So I make an anime blog, then I start watching a bunch of shows that people are talking about. I watch, like, what the fuck is it called? Oh, shit. It's a good show, the UFO table show. Futakoi Alternative. Simone, which was about lesbians, and I thought that was amazing, because at this time, I'm now all about lesbians. Revolutionary Girl Utena. I just start watching, like, anything that people are talking about and everyone's saying is good, I start watching. And so I'm just, like, completing anime left and right. And mind you, up until this point, from, like, early 2006 to this point in 2007, I had been super depressed. Like the worst depression, anxiety that you could possibly imagine. So I was just coming out of this massive depression, and then I start watching anime, and it starts digging me out of it. And after a while of living back in Virginia Beach for a few months, I started, like, making friends and talking to people a little bit, which I hadn't been doing before. So anime played this big role in getting me out of my depression. Not completely, because I still ended up later getting just as bad. But for a while it made me feel better. And so what I did was, there's a bunch of people I looked up to on these anime forums. There was, like, the administrator of Mega Tokyo forums, Omo Ikane, who still reads my blog, and I still read his. He was someone I looked up to, and there was some other people from other websites, and I looked at their favorites lists, because they had them posted on Mega Tokyo. And I just, like, wrote down every show that was in a favorites list of anyone I respected, and I just wanted to watch all of them. So I had this huge list of all the shows I needed to watch, and I'd watch shows from the list, I'd watch other stuff at random that I found just because I was just consuming as much anime as I could. And then in 2007 was also, like, later that year, in, I want to say, September, because that's when the school year started, is when I met Dan-san, my best friend ever since. And he had been in my Japanese class. Like, I had taken Japanese 2, and he had been in that class. And at the time, he sat in the back of the class with me. And he told me he was into anime. I probably bugged him about it, because I would always tell him, "Hell, are you into anime?" So I asked him if he was into anime, and he said yes, and he implied he had seen a lot of shows. And I asked him if he had seen Haruhi, and he was like, I don't really like it that much. A year later, he's big into Haruhi. But anyway, he was acting like he didn't think it was that big a deal or whatever, and I tried to talk to him. Then, like, he was only there for, like, 2 days, and then he was just gone for the rest of the school year. Because it turns out he had chronic headaches, so he just wouldn't show up to school for most days out of the year. And he wasn't cured of that till, like, years later. So in 2007, the year starts off, and that he just happens to be in my Japanese class again. But I'm not sitting next to him this time. But I can't tell it's him. I think it looks like him, but I'd only seen him for a couple days. And he also was at my lunch table, but he was always asleep. So I couldn't ask him about anything, and I was super shy anyways. But me and my friend, who were sitting at this lunch table, and he was just sitting there asleep. And then one day, he comes in to the cafeteria with a Lucky Star book in Japanese. Like a fan book. Like a magazine about Lucky Star in Japanese, and he's sitting there reading it at the lunch table. And I'm sitting there like, there are only 2 people in this school who have possibly heard of Lucky Star. Me and this guy. And so immediately I'm like, holy fuck, I have to talk to him. So I start asking him about it. And he was super quiet. I didn't know at the time he was a hikikomori. He didn't talk to anybody. But we had the same study block right after lunch, and I was just like passing notes to him, and I got him to give me his Yahoo, I think, address. Yahoo or AIM, one of them. Instant Messenger clients. Pre-Skype Instant Messenger clients. So, I get him to give me one of those, and I start messaging him, And that was the last day he ever came to school. Period. He dropped out by the end of that year because of his chronic headaches. So, had I not talked to him, had he not brought in that Lucky Star book, we never would have met. We became best friends. And he taught me about torrents, because I didn't know how to use them. Because he was a huge quality guy. Like, he wanted everything he watched had to be high quality. Mind you, high quality at this time was like 480p, but this is before even 720 was standard. But it was still 480p as opposed to fucking shitty streams. So he taught me how to torrent anime, and that was when the floodgates were just open. Now I could just watch anything, I could find anything, and I just started watching every anime I could get my hands on. My anime blog, I kept writing on it, like, all the time. All I wanted to do was write on my anime blog. I wrote on that fucking thing constantly. 2008 rolls by, all I do is watch anime and anime blog, you know. 2009 comes up. 2009 was when I just started writing all the time. There was, in the month of February of 2009, I wrote 60 posts in 1 month. Because what I would do is, I would sit in class and write anime blog posts instead of doing my work. I would just any class that I was bored with, I'd just write a post, and then in study block, I'd write a post, and then I'd get home, and I'd copy the posts I'd written on paper onto the computer, and then I'd write another post before bed. So if you're ever wondering, how did I get better at writing? That's how I did it. I was writing constantly, in different styles, all the time. Like, there'd be 3 posts a day, and they'd all be totally different from one another. Like, not even feel like they're written by the same guy, because I was just experimenting. I wanted to write about everything. And I just stayed hardcore into it. And then 2010, I tried to even, like, I made a website. Like, I got, like, a proper domain name, because I wanted to start doing it professionally. At some point, I realized, man, I'm really into anime blogging. That's all I've been doing for 3 years. Maybe I should try to make a career out of it. Didn't pan out at all, because A, I wasn't that good of a writer. B, I had no universal appeal, because all my writing was super about me. Like, my whole style was, I called myself the otaku gonzo journalist. The whole idea was that I was writing about anime as perceived by me through the filter of who I am. But who I was an uninteresting, depressed, privileged 19-year-old. So it wasn't that interesting to read that kind of thing for older audiences, you know? Like, for me, when I go back and read my old posts, I'm like, ugh, I don't care about you 19-year-old piece of shit and your problems. Get over it. But that's just, you know, looking back. So I continued to be into that. I always struggled with trying to... I've never been good at keeping up with currently airing shows. You've probably noticed, if you follow Digidoes Anime, that there's these, like, bursts of when I'm really watching everything, and then it just stops for months. That's been me my whole anime blogging career. And I made a bunch of friends while anime blogging who would teach me everything about being a better writer. Ghost Lightning, the #1 person to bring up, who started blogging in late 2008, and he and I became friends, and he would just, you know, he would tell me the things that are wrong about my writing, and I would always be resistant at first, but then eventually realize, fuck, he's right, I'm terrible. Him and some other people, Loli Kitsune, a bunch of others who really, like, were heavy on me, Otosan, about making my writing better, and I loved all these people's writing. Like, that's why I took their advices, because I looked up to them. Ghost Lightning was a phenomenal blogger, and I still go back and read his posts sometimes. Like, when there's some show I remember that he did a post on, and then I watch it, I go read his post, and I'm just like, fuck, this dude was so good. And he stopped anime blogging in 2012, but his 4-year run was, like, golden. And so I was friends with a lot of other anime bloggers, which is why I kept doing it, because the only people who read anime blogs are other anime bloggers, like, as a general rule. Not a hard and fast rule. There are some that are more popular, or some that have, like, a dedicated readership, like Ghost Lightning had certain people who just read his blog. But for the most part, anime blogs were read by other anime bloggers. So, you know, I was a part of that community. But that community started to kind of just fall by the wayside around 2012-ish, to late 2011, early 2012. A lot of people were losing interest, moving on. Blogging was kind of dying as a medium because Tumblr and Twitter showed up, and they were a big deal, you know. I think Twitter really killed the anime blog, because I think most anime bloggers realized that they didn't really want to write extensively about every show. They just wanted to talk to other people about shows. So Twitter, you know, gave them an easy vehicle to do that, where they didn't have to have a release schedule or any of that shit and write to an audience of like 5 people. So, you know, people migrated to other stuff, and blogging kind of died out as a medium. I mean, people still do it, but it doesn't have a big audience. And then in 2012, I got really into My Little Pony because I discovered that, and I got really into video games again. And I sort of just I was drifting away from anime. And then because I started making the My Little Pony videos at the end of 2012, that overtook my life. Like, everything became about Pony to me because I was doing these videos and they were gaining such momentum so quickly. Like, if you're a newer subscriber, you might not realize that those 75,000 subs I have all came in like this quick, sudden rush. Like, the Pony videos just had this huge increase in subscribers, and people treated me like some kind of celebrity at the time, and I totally bought into it. So, like, all I cared about was My Little Pony for a long time. And then eventually, I always planned to eventually leave Pony and do video game analysis, because that was what I bought all this fucking equipment for. And it never happened, because by the time I quit Pony, I wanted to do anime again. And then all it took was blogging Serial Experiments Lane, and that totally, I was ready. Like, I had been steadily watching anime with my ex-girlfriend because she was a big anime fan as well. And so, like, as season 4 of Pony went on, we both were kind of like losing interest, and then we were also watching anime on the side sometimes together. And I was kind of like building up this sense of like, yeah, I want to get into anime again. I started making the useless anime knowledge videos, and I was like, yeah. And then as soon as I blogged Elaine, I was like, this is where I'm going. It's going straight to anime. Like, up until then, I'd been doing some video game videos here and there. I was like, it's going to be anime and video games. But after Elaine, it was just like, it's going to be anime. I'm going right back to where I came from. And that's the story. And it's interesting to think about, like the things that changed over time. Were like, in that early era, when it was just all action, that's all that mattered. And then later on, it was more about, like, cute girls and the chemistry of characters. Like, I was all about characters for the longest time, from like 2007 up until 2012. I was all about like liking the characters or relating to the characters or wanting to be like or be around these characters. That was it. That was all that mattered. The storyline, I didn't give a fuck about storyline. I cared about characters and visuals. And I was a huge fan of Akiyuki Shinbo because all of his shows were these super visual experiences that usually had great characters in them, like Hidamari Sketch, Sayonara Zetsubo Sensei, later on Bakemonogatari. And then it was only after like Madoka that I started to take more interest in story, because Madoka was a show where I didn't like the characters, but I liked the story. And I was like, whoa, story can be cool. And then like I got into like Mass Effect and stuff, and I started appreciating story more. And that's why when I came back to anime, when I started doing these videos, I cared way more about story than I did before. And that's why I've gotten into shows like, you know, Log Horizon and Psycho Pass and Ghost in the Shell that are like really story driven, because my tastes changed so much. That's the complete story. That's everything. That's the whole story of how I got into anime and how my life as an anime fan has gone. I went from some kid who watched Adult Swim to a forumite, eventually became a blogger. I should mention that when I started blogging, I eventually left forums because I realized that I didn't have to follow any rules on my blog. I could just do whatever I want, and I sort of still go by that now. I'm a much more courteous individual than I was before. I'm not a hot-headed brat who's trying to say, fuck you, I do what I want, but I do what I want. And that's it. That's the history. I'm done. This video is too long. That's half. I hope you enjoyed it, because I enjoyed saying it. This, by the way, is vodka, Kahlua, and chocolate milk. If anyone was wondering why I seem a little drunker than I was at the beginning.